So I'm just gonna share my screen. Hold on. Okay. Right. Okay. So hello everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join me for my talk. My name is Nadia. As Susie said, I'm from Malaysia. I'm currently talking to you at about 3 a.m. Malaysian time. So I plan to talk about my creativity and inspiration and about balancing careers and then my art practice in general. So a short introduction, I'm 36 years old and I'm a visual artist that focuses primarily on textile and a bit of mixed media collage. I'm also an instrument engineer for an oil and gas industry and have been for the past 12 years. Prior to that, I worked for the National Broadcasting Company as a telecommunications engineer, and I studied electronics in university. I've always been creative, but when I was in university, I somewhat kept a consistent art practice. I painted a lot, stretched my own canvas like the rest of them, painted the wall in my university room and played with printmaking a lot. I started to pursue art professionally as I started to put myself out there in the local arts industry and joining all the exhibitions, applying for art grants and residencies since 2015. So that would just make it like about 5 years plus. So this is just a picture of me, at work in one of the fabrication yard in one of my platforms. A bit of like just an info about my work. I go to offshore platforms a lot, and that actually is kind of the place or the time where I would do my work. I would bring a lot of my work with me, and because they are small and tiny and they're textile based, I can just roll them up or fold them in my suitcase. And then at night after work and after all the meetings have finished, I would be in my room in the barge, seas, and the ocean, and I would just stitch. And I find that it comforts me, like bringing a piece of home or a piece of my studio and keeping me company. So this is also a picture of one of my exhibitions. And then also this is when how I started was actually just, I would say it's a coincidence, or it's kismet, because in 2014 I was pregnant with my kid, and because I could not do anything much, I began to look for another outlet that I could express myself with. So I took an oil painting class at a local studio, which was good, and it just opened a creative door for me. So I gave birth and I started a small on the side kids wear business, which was just only an outlet for me and my kids and my friend's kid. But it kind of snowballed into something big. Um, but because to be successful in fashion, which is a huge industry in itself, I knew I either had to quit my job to focus. So I decided to stop and sell it off while the going is good. So in the kids wear business, I used and designed my own textile. And when we stopped, I was left with bolts and bolts of fabric. And that was when I began to experiment, and I used these rolls of fabric as the surface instead of buying canvases to paint on, because it was just cheaper, and because I'm also reusing the material. So I gesso all these pieces, these bolts of fabric to the size that I want, gesso them, and then just paint, and then just had fun. So and I think during the period before selling off my kids' wear and my actual art practice, I have begun playing around with mixed media work and collages, because to me, collage is a very accessible medium. It also takes me back to my university days where I could just easily spend the whole day working on several pieces of work and that, by just playing with collage. Well, even until now, to kickstart my studio time, I warm up with a little collage work. I have like about 2 or 3 sketchbooks of like little sketchbook of different colors and different paper materials, where I would just collage, spend the first half an hour or 1 hour just cutting out pictures and then just collaging, just to warm up my creative muscle or mental muscle. And then I did a lot of these domestic home series, as you can see here. And this is when I think I started to develop my own style of using blocks or blobs of colors that is apparent until now. Um, I've also been into these like peachy or beige or skin colored tints, and I still love them until now. And if you also notice, I also like collage with a lot of empty space or negative space, as you call it. Um, and this is also another example of my mixed media collage series. I call them the bird series, and I have a lot of them because they accompany me during my work travel. This was just easy because the only items I need were a pair of scissors and glue and my paper. And sometimes what I love when I travel is I would just go to the local magazines, shops, and then just grab like a free magazine copy or a local newspaper, um, and then I would just use the images from there. And I also like to use this like really beige or craft colored paper because I feel like it adds to the nostalgia, and I feel that the white colored surface can be too jarring. I love collage also to me because it can be really narrative. It's a narrative sort of work where I feel like I can play God and just create a story with just a few cut and paste. Um, just showing you just example of my early mixed media work. These are slightly larger and I used reclaimed materials. These are from the deconstructed furnitures that my dad loved to work with. And in the case of the right one, an old discarded shelving piece. And I don't like gesso this wood. I just like to paint on them straight and raw. And I used to seal my work after, but now I don't, and I leave them open and only seal them when I sold them. It also depends on whether the client wants them sealed or not. I had this um, big book of like a butterfly encyclopedia that I got when I was a kid. I think I was 15, that I absolutely love. And I spent years just flipping through the encyclopedia. It's like really thick, where they talk about butterfly species and like they, they a lot of different butterflies with different types. And I always think of freedom when I look at butterflies. And in an essence, I think I was creating a narrative of freedom for myself. Um, I also like to block out the eyes in all of my work, collage or figurative embroidery. Um, I think for the closest reason that I just like leaving some mystery to the viewers. I also like not giving 100% of control and power to the viewers. um, Closing the eyes of the people in my work, it kind of like it does not allow the viewers in a way to see everything. um, and later on, I would just explain more when we reach to that. um, so these are just like pictures of the views in my hotel rooms in separate occasions and in different locations. My work requires me to travel a lot. So I began to adapt by creating a portable studio for myself that I still use until now. I keep a separate setup for my different mediums. I have a bag for my printmaking work, a bag for my collage work, a bag for my embroidery, and a bag for all my painting work. They're all portable and travel safe, as in not going to be confiscated at the airport. I've learned to substitute certain things, like I use a seam ripper instead of a small embroidery scissors to make sure that they can pass through all the airport scannings. I like doing work when I travel, and for me, I always give my best series or body of work when I travel. There's just so much to see and no distractions, of the domestic life back home, with kids, the housework. So I'm able to just be free and work throughout the night, or I can just start and stop according to my schedule and no one else. And I also like the challenge it gives me. Being a portable studio, there are limitations of how many tubes of paints I could bring. So sometimes I would just challenge myself to work with just that few colors, or to come up with something based on the colors or the sceneries of where I was or am at the moment. So I'm just going to show you this slide and the next, when I start to mix my collage with fabric. I was already doing stuff with fabric all throughout, like block printing, silk screening, um, printmaking and embroidering, but it never occurred to me to start combining them. And as always, when I work, I like to work with on a minimum of two of similar style and narrative. And I like work that tells a story and that viewers can see more of than just one version of the same concept. So I was also using whatever I had around my house, like this was just taken from old comic books and just playing with colors. So this is also another view of my mixed media collage work. Um, so this is my first ever exhibition with only my textile work. Initially, I was playing around, like I told you guys, with the excess bolts of fabric from my kids' wear collection and using them as practice to paint on before I invested with a stretch canvas. But then after a while, I began to love the feel of paint, or the feel of painting, and the brush strokes on these like really coarse and raw textile surfaces. And I love how the paint absorbs through the weave and the weft of the fabric. And because I had a lot of these painted scraps, and they're small, I keep them quite small, like about 6 inch to 6 inch. And I begin to free embroider them during my off time, like while watching the television, or when I hang out with my kids at the park, or during long car rides. We have really long car rides in Malaysia. um, and then, or while my kids in the bath, so this is why, if you notice, like some of them seem to have like really arbitrary patterns. It's just me working on simple, easy stitches. And I do a lot of marking in my paint work. So for me, this feels similar, except that you're just doing it with thread and needle. Okay, so this is the close-up of my early textile work. If you notice, I played around with the amount of colors in my work because I love both the economy of colors, like the first one, like the left one, um, and also I like to have an abundance of colors, like the middle one. So this is not really clear, but at that time my preference over the color pink, shades of pink, is like starting. And my work almost always have pink in them, which is in a way funny because I wear dark or neutral colored clothing a lot, almost all the time, and my home is neutral in color. And there is nothing pink about me, but my work, I find that has a lot of pink in them. um, I think because to me, pink is a mixture of a warm color and a cool color to me, depending on how you mix them. And I always mix my own pink color. So, and I feel that it softens the message I try to carry. Um, because my work, if I were to describe my work, I would describe them as really vibrant and colorful. But because I'm inspired a lot by the concept of grief and loneliness and everyday sadness and pain, um, I find that like pink carry that message. It also softens. You will also notice that I have already started to use one of my favorite patterns to stitch, which I call the honeycomb. You can see all the group rectangular triangles. And this goes back to my university days as a fourth year major in telecommunications. I also, when I knew I wanted to pursue this, like stitching on my paintings, because embroidery is such it's such an old skill, right? Which goes back since forever. Um, I know that it would be hard for me to master embroidery and all the stitches that they have. So what I did was I just focused on the really easy stitch that I could do, and just focus on doing them repetitively, and also making patterns from these simple stitches. So, okay, there's this subject when I was in fourth year major, when I was fourth year in my uni, called mobile communications, that I really love. And in that subject, we used a lot of honeycomb pattern reference when we talk about cellular planning or capacity planning. If you can see, I just showed an example of that honeycomb planning. And when I was in uni, I just got so obsessed with that pattern. I thought it's really beautiful. And I used to just replicate that shape in my lecture books during lectures. And it got on to be really elaborate. I moved to an art block. I would just bring an art block to the class or to the patterns or to the lectures. And I would just keep on drawing and drawing. I remember I used to amuse my friends. um, I drew animals with the cells, weird robots, natures, a lot of things. I would just use the pattern, and I would just make them smaller or bigger. I would just draw faces in them, around them. Um, it was just one of those patterns that when I work on it, it becomes really meditative. So right now, when I was just doing that, in the present state, it was just replicating what I had done in university with just thread and needle. I also kind of like visually how it looks, that it kind of covers the painted area. It's like a grove or a pile of moody thoughts, which is how I always want to present my work. It's seemingly colorful and vibrant, but it's actually somber and moody. It's like a dark cloud that covers. So, and then this is also another version, another inspiration. Hold on, let me check my notes. But this is when I was, I think, when I started working in the company, I did a lot of this work called fire and gas mapping, where in my nature of work, we would do the mapping of our platforms to see whether our gas detectors can detect, should a fire break out in our platforms. And we use this software called fire and gas mapping. And in that software, as you can see here, they would show you like all these areas where you get a lot of detection, which is in green, and where the detectors can't detect the fire, or the gas cloud, which is in red, and where you can somewhat detect the gas cloud or the potential gas cloud of fire, which is in orange. And I think I worked on it a lot, and I did, a lot of this mapping, that the patterns, I kind of really find the patterns, or the mapping to be really beautiful. So when I was working on this, I think I was subconsciously inspired by the fire and gas mapping, the site. So you can see that I used like very similar colors. The blobs, I was just mostly inspired by the blobs of, you know, how like the green and the red and the orange. Um, as you can see, so these are also the different versions of that fire and gas mapping. Um, yeah, I guess. And I was also, I think this, during this time, I was really doing very minimal embroidery because I was more fixated on the fire and gas mapping. Um, and I just really like playing with the color orange a lot. I think it just have to do with my fascination with um, the gas cloud or the fire cloud and the possibilities of fires happening. I guess I was really inspired by that when, because I did I think about 150 platform mappings during those time. So this is also a work called the Hotel series. Um, this is just I think during in 2016 I was traveling a whole lot, and I had a roll of this beautiful coarse linen that I found by chance in one of my favorite fabric supply stores, and it's just an unused like end of bolt fabric, and it has a lot of like it has been like discolored, which is why the owners don't want to use it, and they're just waiting to throw it away. And I really like how raw it is and how coarse it is. So I, I got it. I brought it home, and then I cut it into really small 10-inch by 10-inch pieces. Um, and I think I cut like about 10 or 15, I can't remember, but it was just like a tiny stack. And I would just bring them in my suitcase and just carry them to work with me with my like my paint set. And because a lot of time I was traveling and staying by the waterfront or by the beach side a lot, those days, I think I was just captivated by the beautiful juxtaposition of the warm sandy beach and also the dazzling blue sea. So, which is why you can see that the colors are somewhat similar, even though they are done at different times, and different areas, or different countries even. But I also think it's also because I, brought the same paint set, so the colors like really don't change much. Um, but I would spend a lot of my time just, after work or in between work, just, lounging around at the balcony and just listening to the waves lapping, and also just to see how, um, like the pattern of the sun when it hits the water. I find it really beautiful. And I guess the small dots are a reflection or a reaction to that. When you can see the sun rays and they were dancing um, on the water, the reflection, it seems like they're dancing. So I guess I was just trying to replicate the movement of that with the like dotted stitches. Um, okay, so this is the work I did when I was pregnant with my second baby, and this was for a campaign I did with a local NGO called Women's Aid Organization. The campaign that they had, it's called Invisible Women, where they just want to highlight the gender inequality when it comes to the working force. And for me at that time, it was so apt when I was approached by the curator. I was at that time about 7 months pregnant, and I felt so, I could relate to this campaign so much, because when I was pregnant, with my second baby, with that pregnancy, I spent a lot. I mean, I kept my pregnancy a secret for the first 6 months, because in my nature of work and in my industry of work, you know, being pregnant is a setback. You're not allowed to go offshore. You're not allowed to go to plants, and you're stuck to your desk, you know, doing desk job, which can also hinder your performance appraisal a lot, because you know when your work is like field based, and then when you're stuck, you spend 9 months of that not going to the field, not having a hands-on experience or hands-on like work, it can be really destructive. And in my company, there were stories of women, you know, just getting really low appraisals at work because of that, you know. And we have issues of like bosses specifically requesting for like male engineers because they do not want to be set back for 9 months, stuff like that. So you can see my explanation here. So I said it is titled Her Reproductive / Unproductive Years. So it explores the unfortunate relationship between a working woman's journey into motherhood and its indirect consequence to her professional working life. So the horizontal silhouette of a pregnant woman like this, you can see it's a horizontal silhouette, signifies the grace and beauty of that period in her life, the reproductivity, but it's also highlighted by the descending graph of her career, which is this, or a perceived performance at work. You know, like when she's pregnant, her productivity is seemingly, you know, she's seemingly unproductive. So my artist message that I spent a long time mulling over how I want to express this issue, because I started my motherhood journey at a thriving age of my career, which is late 20s and mid 30s. And the nature of my work has a lot of limitations for pregnant women and later moms with small children. So oftentimes I always felt torn between having to choose, and guilt over choosing my career advancement over my kid. So, like I said, for my second pregnancy, I kept it a secret for over 6 months to avoid having no workload given to me, which would be detrimental to my career progression. So I felt like the mindset and culture of working mothers need to be addressed and improved in many workplace. Um, and then I think, uh, you know, I never really realized, but I think motherhood has begun to seep into my work. So these are one of my larger pieces where and also the first time where I started to do figurative embroidery, but in a more loose sense. I've always loved the idea of doing a very silhouette based version of figures. Um, and then I also was exploring with the idea of back embroidery, or what some people call verso embroidery. I actually painted this on the wrong side, so which is why you can see lines here, because they're just stitched on from the wrong side, and this is the back side. I like it because it gives, for me, it gives the feeling of it being raw, and somehow imperfect, which is what I feel, you know, motherhood in general is. It's very raw, and you can't control it. It's very, you know, um, imperfectly perfect or perfectly imperfect in some ways. Um, and I also experimented with like collage on textile, and then like embroidering on paper as well. But mostly I was just trying to see if I can work with all of this silhouette. I ended up doing like a couple of commissions based on this kind of work, where I have a lot of mothers who would send me pictures of themselves with the kids. They kind of most of these mothers like the idea of the raw imperfect stitches, and also that it's very, very loose in general. um, and also this is also the darker side of when I was working with my motherhood teams. uh, I think when I had both my kids, I suffer with postpartum anxiety. And at that time, I didn't know that it was postpartum anxiety. Because I've always, you know, wrongly, like I've always assumed that, when you had postpartum anxiety or postpartum depression, you're always unhappy all the time. And I felt that I was all right. I was laughing, I looked at, cute man, I was laughing, things are fine some days. But I began to get this really, I think, panicky feeling of especially something happening to my kid. And then later on, like as it got really worse, before I got help, was I was always panicking about like other kids being dead. So I always want to, and also at the same time, I always wanted to incorporate words into my artwork. But then I always feel that it would bind the painting to a specific theme and subject. Um, so I felt like this to address my postpartum anxiety. I feel like this is a good point. Um, this was shown in the left part, the missing kid found. It was actually for an exhibition called Rebirth, and that was the theme. And I did this because I feel when I became a mother, not only that it birthed feelings of extreme love, but it also birthed to me feelings of extreme fear and anxiety. And I'm constantly scared, particularly of having my kids being taken, kidnapped, and then sexually abused. And this could haunt me during the dark days. And like any normal things, a man just walking past the car or a stranger opening the car door whilst just looking at my child could trigger me off. So the words mimic the news headline of every mother's fear when their missing kids are found. So like their missing kids are found dead, strangled, assaulted. And I use like really subtle colors for the left piece, for the words. For the words, because I just want to show people that, how people do not like to talk about this dark issue. But the fact that sexual abuse or like child abuse in general is actually really rampant in in everywhere, like in all cultures, all countries. But I just want to I just did them really faintly, like it's just something that you just whisper and not talk about openly. And the colors I use, you can see a lot of neutral colors. For me, it relates to a lot of the abuse themselves, like the dark blood, the dark red signify like dried blood, and this color probably just poop, because kids always poop when they're scared. So I would just somehow imagine that the kids are, they would poop when they were being tortured. Well, sorry for being dark, but that was what I was trying to carry. And also this piece is inspired by a poem from this poet Kate J. Barr called Dogs at the Park, which I find extremely haunting and powerful. So I'm just gonna read like some part of it if you guys don't mind. It's called Dogs at the Park. It says, the poem reads, "I'm aware of dogs at the park. I'm aware of men too. The number of steps to the keys, to the car, to the long stretch of grass where the baby lolls to and from, sticks in his teeth. They ask, what good is a life with fear at your edges? And I ask, what mother does not listen to the slam of the sedan door and turn to see what ghost emerges? We are the gatekeepers, the sentinel. Maybe he is just a man walking, or maybe he is looking for a bird to break. How many have already been broken? Let us count their wings. Um, okay, so and then that work, this missing kid found, kind of continued. I continued that momentum to the right piece, which is done at a, I think, later age, later part of my pregnancy. This is also done during my second pregnancy. Um, and this is called a trigger warning. In general, this work or this series called a trigger warning. Um, so I continued on to my exploration with wanting to do like news headline. And for this particular piece, I really wanted to explore the news headline from my local papers on murdered or sexually abused kids. Um, but you know, when I was working on it, I found it to be too heavy, both in the labor and in context. And also I started this, like I said, because I wanted to face my anxiety head on. And at that time, but I just don't know whether it is really helping, because when I was doing research, it was just horrible, because I kind of read the news that date back to the past 10 or 20 years, and reading the news headlines, it was just heartbreaking. So this particular piece or headline is actually an actual headline from our local newspaper dated October 17th, 2007. And it was on the case of the brutal death of the 8-year-old Nurin Jaslin, um, who was just found brutally assaulted and killed. I was only 13 years old then, and I did not really understand why adults just cry over it. Like they did a lot. The news coverage was long at that time, and I remember my mom just crying, and she would just go outside and talk to our neighbors, and they would just, at that time, I think in 2007, like child abuse in Malaysia was not really common thing, or just not commonly um, documented, so it was really a shock to our country, particularly to what happened to this Nurin Jaslin. In context, she was found with an eggplant stuffed in her anus, um, and she was black and blue. I just won't go into detail. So my initial idea was to completely surround the headlines with beads, because I feel like, I just want to just beautify the headlines, because I feel like, people won't talk about this. It's too morbid, it's too dark, and it's too depressing, right? But what if I put beads on it? I beautify it, I make it really pretty. Would you want to talk about it? Because we need to talk about it. Child sexual abuse is an important thing to talk about. So yeah. So, and also I also did this in the quarantine, and I felt that that gave me, and I was not able to see my therapist, so this was kind of like a therapy for me. I have I think I'm still going to continue on with this line with this series. Um, so this is something I'm still exploring at the time being. Um, okay, so this is just one of the work, or larger piece of work for one of the exhibitions. And I called this series To Remember This Brings Painful Joy. I said earlier on, when I first started this presentation, that my work is hugely inspired by the concept of grief and loss and everyday pain. And a lot of it has to do with memories. I've always been fascinated with the concept of memories, and how memory can actually bring us so much pain. So this is just, this is the description of it. So I'm just going to read through. So To Remember This Bring Painful Joy explores the connection between loving and losing. A memory is a scientific thing, but it has the power to make us keel over, render us helpless, and paralyze us with its recollection. My textile work is continuous study and artistic representation of the memories in our brains. The embroideries teaches us snippets of moments start within the folds of the textile and in the folds of our brains, really. So the bright colors and chaotic strokes are just like many of my memories of good and bad times. They're sharp and vivid, and almost all the time unreliable. So verso embroidery is also used to represent the other aspects of memories. Verso embroidery is like the backwards embroidery. So because memories can also be fuddled and fuzzy, and also an attacks of texture. So the main source of inspiration for my work centers around grief, and I feel that this exhibition hits home with the concept of memories. So this body of work is actually based on a personal memory I had in my mid-20s with the person I thought I would marry. It was a simple, mundane, everyday moment, but it remains to be one of the strongest piece of memories that keeps coming back to me. So I was musing over a few titles for this body of work, and because I always relate my work with a particular poem that I find to be that I was taken to at that time, it was just fitting that I found this in a nick of time. This came from a line of a poem, a prayer from this Jewish poet. So it's called "To Remember This Brings Painful Joy." Um, so this is also another one of a different piece of work in the same series. But I just want to show you that I said that is based this series is based on a personal memory I had in my mid-20s. So this is a building in the center of in our city, which is Kuala Lumpur. You can see this iconic building in Kuala Lumpur. It's also a tourist area. You will not miss it. So when I was in my mid-20s and dating a lot with my ex-boyfriend, we would spend lots and lots and lots of nights just at this area in this place. And that particular piece of memory was just, I remember it was one of those nights where we're just hanging out. It was really warm and balmy, the kind of weather that just hugs you. And I remember just having the best time of my life and just feeling all the feels, you can say, and looking up at this. We were just like sitting and hanging out opposite of this building, and I was just looking at this building. I was just feeling, oh my God, like this is it, all those kind of like mid-20s love thingy, like if I died now, things would be so perfect. And I remember this building and the structure and the shapes and the lines so perfectly well, even until now. And I think I was just trying with this black embroidery, trying to just capture that. And we can also see, I don't have it with me, but like I have about like 8 pieces for this line, for this series. So I do a lot of this shop stitches to just represent this particular building. Um, and then these are also examples of my textile work. I showed these 2 pieces because a lot of my textile work are based on my state of mind and my current mood. And I titled this piece on my right called "The Night We Fought," and I find that I'm always inspired to paint a lot, during my dark moments than my happy moments, which I find it quite weird. I have always worked or operated like that, even in when I work or when I write, when I do something creative. I'm always inspired by, dark and sad feelings. So, and I remember this particular painting a lot. I think it was one of those marital, spats that, just got really huge and big. And I think we went off to our separate ways, and I just stuck in the studio for a long time. And I remember using a lot of the colors that I don't really particularly like this really dark green. And for an instance, for this left piece, I call this yolk, if you can see here, because for some reason, during one of those fights, you know, egg yolks were involved. I won't go into details, but there were a lot of throwing around and stuff like that. But you know, we were young when, you know, when we got married, I guess, and we were both, you know, type A kind of kind of, kind of, guy, man and woman. So, and then, you know, I got really inspired by that. And I think it's a thing to also calm me down. And I think these two pieces, I remember that it was just done directly after that. And I spent hours in the studio just working on and trying to replicate that mood and that scene. And these two particular pieces, I remember that I don't really like, but it has, they got a lot of reaction from people. And I think both of them are sold. And I also I used the same kind of embroidery, but for this right side, it was a bit different. I was kind of just, I don't know, trying to calm myself down and using a repetitive, like long stitches. But I somehow love the idea that my work and the colors I choose are always represented by my, you know, state of mind. And this particular textile piece was, I was also experimenting with these fuzzy stitches, because I have seen, like, I remember I came across this really cute animation. It's by John Liebler, and it was depicting, in this animation, it was actually one of the proteins dragging the happy hormone. So I thought that was really cute, and it stuck with me for the longest time. And that was when I, you know, started to trying to replicate that really cute protein pieces with that. And then this is also for a show, one of the show I submitted and applied, called Painting Through the Night, and this is called Keeping Score. And this was when, just to show, this was actually, I kept count on how many nights it took for me to finish this this piece. A lot of the time, my work only start when I put the kids to bed, and I would only start studio time at 11 p.m. at night, sometimes until 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning. So this exhibition was titled Painting Through the Night. So, and I gave this piece, you know, I called this piece Keeping Score, because this is how many nights it took for me to finish. And every time I work on it, I would just stitch one, and I would group it in like 5. So I was also experimenting with like block printing. I was doing a lot of block printing on the sides, but this is the first time I actually incorporate them into my work. This was one of my experimental studio warm-ups. I do a lot of poetry also. So I've always wanted to incorporate those, I mean, my poems or my writings in one. But this was inspired by a conversation I had with a friend who grew up in the Himalayas. And I remember she was just telling me about her childhood, and I felt such a longing of a childhood that I did not have, you know, all the colors, all the senses, all everything. And I drove back after that lunch with her, so inspired. And I don't know, something just took over me, and I just went into the studio and I just kind of just wrote on it and just painted, and I just pasted, and I just kind of took, for this particular piece, I did not embroider, but I just took onto my sewing machine and I just kind of just used different stitches and then just work around it and move the fabric around. So this is also another piece for painting through the night. Sorry, it's just it's not in line. So I do a lot of collage. I was doing collage and also block printing, and the colors are somehow more muted, more dark and moody. I always use different colors when I work at night as opposed to when I was traveling, as you can see. Probably at night, because I always keep the studio lights dim and it's so quiet that I tend to be attracted to like a, you know, a cooler, darker color. So this is like the scenery of this country. I spent a lot of, I think about 5 years of my working years in this wonderful country called Turkmenistan, because one of my platform projects is in there. And I love being there. It's really just like an attack of your senses. Turkmenistan is really just a wide open space, and it's wonderful, and I love how hostile it can be in terms of also the culture and also the environment and the weather. As you can see, I was inspired by the colors, and also the, as you can this, you can see a lot of these bushes as well. So this was this was also for an exhibition called the Kitchen Series. So I made this as a part of a bigger series called The House, and it was inspired by part of a poem by Warwickshire of the same title. And so that's the poem. It says, "Mother says there are locked rooms inside all women, kitchen of lust, bedroom of grief, bathroom of apathy. Sometimes the men, they come with keys, and sometimes the men, they come with hammers." So because I was in Turkmenistan at that time, and I was thinking more and more about the issues women are facing, particularly women that come from a culture so heavy and cloying. Turkmenistan is no stranger to that, and in a way, it is also similar to the culture I grew up in and still living in Malaysia. For this series, I chose the fabric that is widely used as cleaning rags by the Turkmen women. And all Turkmenistan cleaners are women, even for male areas, you know. So, and it's a cheap, strong, and sturdy piece of fabric. And even the description of it, sturdy, strong, and cheap, feels like just how most men in backward cultures view their women. So I name each piece based on the parts of a house, like living room, etc. Because I feel like all these parts of a house, it is just rife with stereotypes in my culture. Also, like particularly the kitchen. So I also, you know, for this Venn diagram, I also want to incorporate math and science into my work, because math and science are also a huge part in my life. And I also love Venn diagram because they are approachable and viewer friendly. So this particular piece, this Venn diagram, it's called X, which is the death of women, where when culture and religion intersects. And sorry, you can see like this is, I wrote the quality of lives versus the quality of wives. This is just to respond to the idea in my religion that you're allowed to have more than one wife. So the maximum is four. It has always been an issue because the man used that particular law to just mostly to just satisfy their sexual needs. And you know, I feel like when they do that, the quality of, you know, lives of their kids and of their wives, I mean, they just completely disregard that. I was just trying to, you know, express that the quality of lives is just more important than your quantity of wives. And this color, if you notice, are just similar to my mother, like the missing kit found, because it was also inspired by that. um, but for me, the colors signify like things that we associate with women, like blood, women, and then also kids poop, women clean kids poop all the time. It's mostly, when we have kids, it's mostly seen as a women's work, even though, parenting is also, and should be, for both. Um, and also these stitches represent like scars. If you notice, like I work with a lot of I work with like women's aid organization a lot, and where they do a lot of advocacy for domestic abuse. And sometimes when I see the scars on these women, and I notice they're always, raised, and also like a paler version of their skin. And I was just trying um, to just, respond to that. um, how the scars look like. It's always paler, and it's always like really like tiny and sharp lines. And these blue colors just signify like bruises on their skin, in domestic abuse. So this is just another example. I wrote less counseling, more policing, because usually in my country, when a woman reports about on like domestic abuse, if a woman comes to the police, or if a woman reports on a domestic abuse with an axe in her head, even with that, for example, it's just me saying, they would be advised to go for counseling, then they would advise to go to the hospital or to the police. And then it's just so different than men. When it happens to the men, you know, the action is so swift. It's either divorce, or a police. It's a police case. But for the women, it's always counseling first, regardless. So I just want to shed some light to that issue. Um, okay, so this is just examples of the things, of the mixed media textile pieces that I do. Um, and I think this was done in quarantine, and in response to, the whole quarantine, social distancing, and trying to find the peace and stillness in a very chaotic, time of our life. um, I I worked with, and I think at that time I was also playing around with a lot of my block printing, and also collage, a lot. And this is also a different part of my mixed media textile pieces. Um, this is also just one of those quarantine pieces that I did. It's called Mother Quarantine. Um, it's a visual journal, a map of the lockdown in our home. So I took to my trusty sewing machine, and the stitches, the green and the red, represent my kids' voices. Green is the toddler, and red is the 6-year-old. So I changed direction every time they laugh. So at that time, they were just talking and playing with themselves and with each other. And I just kind of like stitch. So whenever they laugh, I would just like change, like turn or navigate and change the direction of the textile. So the more complex stitches, if you can see, sorry, like this one, represent their crying. So you can see that for the red is a 6-year-old. So the 6-year-old cried more significantly when she's fighting sleep. Also when the toddler kind of ruins whatever that she's working on. So the netting, this is a fruit netting, comes from the fruits we eat. We ate a lot of fruits during the quarantine. It's my idea of giving them like as snacks, or to keep them from just mindlessly eating. So I use fruits a lot. And the weaving represent, this is the weaving. If you can see the small part of the weaving, it represents their screening time. So one line represents, it stands for 20 minutes. So during the quarantine, that particular day, you can see a lot of like screen times for the kids. There are also my engineering drawing. These are my engineering drawings, signifying work. I was still working full time from home at that time. And also the kids' snack boxes. So more food, more, motherhood, and the kids line doodles. So these are the work from my kids, and they were just doodling next to me, so layered over my own painting. So I have kept the painting since early of this year. It's a piece of an unwanted color study, and I only found use of it when the lockdown happens. So for me, the beauty in this piece is knowing that in years to come, I'm able to look at it, and all the memories come rushing. I tried the best that I could, and I loved as much as I could. Um, so just sharing with you some of the pieces, of the smaller pieces and the more vibrant and happy pieces of the lockdown commissions that I did for subject matter art, where it is just where people can commission me to do small embroidery studies, um, based on the colors or the memories that they have. So this was a fun practice because I was able to dig and look at the questionnaire that they fill in, and where they would talk about their fears and hope and one particular memory or place that they like. So I would use the colors to just hopefully closely represent their memories. And I also, if you can see, like my honeycomb patterns have kind of evolved as well to a sharper, more, I don't know, complex shape. I just feel that it's just relevant, with the how with this volatile and uncertain time of the COVID. And I was also experimenting at the time. This is just an example of my works on paper, which is more like a collage work. It's just a narrative. I just like that it is very narrative. This was in response to one of the exhibition piece theme called childhood. And these two things are so rife in my childhood, like playing by the riverside, just jumping and having the times of my life. And also just sitting at the back of this motorcycle, and then having my cousin, just drive me around. And I just like how narrative collage can be. Okay, I think this is like one of the last of it. This is one of my latest piece of work. I just ended this exhibition, I think about 2 weeks ago. It's called Liberty, and this is what my first figurative, like full figurative embroidery, and it's called Jane Uninterrupted. They are a bunch of paper embroidery of the actual Jane from the famous Peter and Jane series. It's an early reading book for young kids, and I grew up with that. So I have always enjoyed flipping through the pictures and when I was young, and letting my imaginations run wild. And I have always been particularly interested in Jane. But it wasn't until I was a mother and having to teach my girl with her reading that my interest in Jane kind of like heightened. So I always prompt my girl with questions on the book, on pictures from the book. And I feel that even with the very brief storyline, the books are always, a couple of sentences long. Jane always seems stifled by Peter. So when in fact, she overshadows him with her ability to jump higher or skate or doing more interesting activities. So I feel like I want to give Jane her own narrative. So the pieces below are Jane from the books, drawn on paper and then embroidered. So I make 8 pieces of Jane on the pages of book, and Jane on this cleaning paper that I found. It's actually sort of like a household cleaning paper. It absorbs oil really well. And I feel like now that the choices of fiber I use as a surface really play an important role. I'm always more, I'm very into that right now. So as I go deeper into my artistic practice, I always subconsciously choose my fiber. So I choose the pages of books for this one because I believe all young girls and women should be educated and well informed and well read, because my dad always tells me education is your best weapon, and I totally believe in it 100%. And I also use the household cleaning paper because domestic work and women can never be separated, nor I feel like they should be, just to make a point. There is nothing wrong with women who cleans, but the idea that they should be the only one cleaning, that the burden of cleaning is on them, that they do not have the liberty to not clean, is not right for me. So that was what I was doing. And if you can see that I always cover the eyes of the kids, this is also in response to my anxiety about child sexual abuse. In my work with the advocacy with Women's Aid, or with the Women's Aid organization, they always say that childhood molesters or childhood abusers are more particular. They like to respond to pictures of kids online that are looking at the screen head on, or looking at the camera straight on, because for the abusers or the pedophiles, it feels that the kid is looking and engaging with them. So, which is why it's one of part of our advocacy is that if you want to put pictures of your child online, just don't put pictures of them straight looking into the camera. Anyway, so which is why I feel like I'm protecting the kids by like covering the eyes. Okay, so this is the last part of my slide. This is also a part of that liberty piece, and this is my largest textile piece to date, and it's called Uninhibited, Unbridled, and Unhampered. So as per my Jane series, I also use these household fabrics. And if you notice, I've talked about this fabric before for one of my kitchen series. It's the same fabric that I got in Turkmenistan. It's really cheap. They sell it by, I don't know, just really cheap per meter. And it's the kind of cleaning fabric that Turkmenistan women use. It's used to represent the automatic designation of labor and charge for the women. So because in Turkmenistan, women made up of the complete 100% of the cleaning workforce in the country. So you can see them sweeping the roads, the sidewalks, polishing the statues and monuments, trimming the landscape, and also, a lot of things. So I've always wondered why only the women folk were subjected to this labor. So for this work, I wanted to liberate them by representing their spirits with bright, vibrant colors and happy patterns. So the mundane housework routine can be grounding, but the colors and the stitches are, for me, they're uninhibited, unbridled, and unhampered spirits, when they were cleaning. So thank you. I think that is it. I'm sorry I went too long, Susie.
No, don't worry. Thank you so much. I'm just going to unmute everyone and we can go to questions. So maybe if you can stop sharing your screen and I'll put it on technology.
Stop sharing.
Thanks so much. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, I've got a question. Thanks very much. Really interesting talk, Nadia. You talked a lot about the sort of quite kind of, I guess, quite dark subjects. You mentioned them as dark subjects, such as the sexual abuse, of the abuse of children. And it's obviously a difficult subject to tackle as an artist. And I was wondering about how you were feeling, kind of, I guess, when you were making the works and then afterwards, because I think, some of the ideas that you were talking about, you mentioned yourself, are quite kind of hard to sort of think about and sort of and describe and so on. So how do you sort of view your works, the process when you're making them and then afterwards as well?
Thank you so much, Maddie. I this is actually my work with the dark child sexual abuse pieces is actually as an exercise given to me by my therapist when I sought for help with my postpartum anxiety, and I kept on circling around the theme of like sexual abuse, and I felt really because the thought of it will just set me off into panic. So my therapist asked me to kind of do something that can confront it head on, you know.
Mhm.
So because she realizes how meditative and calming embroidery is to
Yeah.
myself. So she wants me to use that tool um,
Mhm.
to try to approach the topic hits on. And I think I love the fact that because when I was doing the research,
Mm.
it was really depressing. And to me, to be honest, a lot of the times there were tears. There were a lot of tears, and especially when I have to read through, the details of what happened with all the headlines.
Mm.
But I was able to look at it as research for my art. I was able to move from a place of sadness to to a mental place of like work. So I was able to kind of escape from that in such a way. So I feel, to me, to be honest, grateful because I was able to um, see it from a professional context, like this is part of a research and part of work. Um, and by doing that, and while I was meditating and doing the stitches, I was able to run through all the things or the calming words or lines that my therapists have helped create with me, to say things like, there are certain things that are beyond my control. This is
Mm.
within my control. You have your kids and you have your sister's kids, and all you are able to help these kind of kids, and this is what you're able to do and stuff like that. So I was able to repeat that to myself as I was working, and it was really helping. And also I was the pieces later on, I would be a part of uh, fundraising or a campaign
Yeah.
for the local NGO that I'm working with, and the money that we get would be used to pay the therapist or the therapy sessions for the abused kids. So in a
Right.
way, I feel like it's something really good that I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm dealing with my fears heads on, but also giving back. So
Mm.
it's actually really good therapy.
Oh, wow. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question.
I have a question a little bit about the art scene in Malaysia. Can you talk a little bit about, because obviously you work in London, don't you, with subject matter, and maybe the difference
Right.
in the two art scenes?
The art scene in Malaysia is it's thriving, but for me, in my own opinion, that the textile art scene, it's not. It's still very new. So because a lot of the art scene in Malaysia and all the art movers and shakers, people are art lecturers and art collectors that are used to see the same type of art in Malaysia, mostly like figurative works, and also they're mostly familiar with oil. I think that I, I do find myself having a harder time trying to push my work towards, because it is something quite new, and I feel that I think this goes to artists worldwide, because they see textile as also something crafty, so they are unable to look at it from a fine arts perspective. So sometimes I get comments that they feel that my work should be suitable for a craft show than an actual exhibition. So I was I'm really just grateful for a certain amount of like curators who actually, you know, agreed or actually perceive my work as fine art. So I'm just slowly trying to push it, you know, more and more to, you know, to Malaysia and the people.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Susie.
Any other questions?
I was just wondering if you thought perhaps that, well, if you find that being a woman is also an impediment to getting your art taken seriously, as well as it being in textile,
Yeah,
whether it's both of those things.
I do. In Malaysia,
Yeah,
very,
yeah. Well,
very, very much so. Uh, in fact, when we talk about like the masters, like the master painters in Malaysia, it's always so weird that there are none of it are, and the celebrated artists in Malaysia are mostly men, which is weird because we have a lot of like females graduating in our art universities, you know, and right now we have a lot of like female artists, but I also find that it's also very hard because of when you are a mother as well. I find that art industry in Malaysia requires a certain lifestyle for you to fit in. For example, like the art shows are always done on a weeknight, for example, like the art openings, right? So it always hinder me and a group of like artist mothers, the Malaysian artist mothers who have kids, because we're not able to attend to the openings. Thus, we're not able to network as much, because I feel like in the art openings are where, you know, networks are made and you can introduce yourself, and, you know, people can actually, you know, talk about your work, or some, you can show your work or introduce yourself. So there was also a limitation. But I do notice that I guess I remember a conversation I had with one of the gallery owners. It's called Cult Gallery. It's one of the widely celebrated gallery in art galleries in Malaysia, and we were talking about this about women artists versus male artists, men artists in Malaysia in general. And even she admits that as a curator and a gallery owner herself, she also notices the very huge bias toward the male artists, but she just can't, she just doesn't know why and how. And probably I think it's just an old mindset that has been around since forever, that somehow just like galleries just take into, I mean, they just falls naturally to them. So this is something that probably they're just trying to, I think right now we're just trying to, work towards it, trying to improve the numbers a little bit. So,
thank you.
thanks, Sammy.
Do we have any last questions? Okay, thank you so much, Nadia. If we could all give Nadia a big round of applause, please.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Nadia.